Welcome to this August 2021 photo presentation. So basically, this presentation is a presentation of my works for the month of August 2021. It's an English version of the French presentation I do on the specific zand.photography channel. And the contents might slightly be different. I'm just going to rant a little bit about the photos I took, what equipment I used, and what the goal was, the process was. So don't hesitate to comment below or ask questions or propose anything according to the content I'm going to present. And if you speak French, you might actually enjoy better the French versions. So let's go. Those two first photos we're taking with one of the cameras I like most. It's an old Leica M8 CCD sensor camera. Basically, it was the first digital rangefinder camera from Leica that uses interchangeable lenses of the M format. And on that camera, those specific photos taken in Zurich were made with a lens which is the Super Angulon 21mm f4. It's an old lens that's supposed not to work on modern digital Leica M lens compatible cameras because the back lens goes really deep, recesses really deep, and can damage your camera's obturation mechanism. Actually, even on the M5 camera, it will get into contact with the light sensor. So it's supposed not to work. But actually on the M8, it does work. And on the M9, I think it works too. And the M240, I've tried, it seems to work. But this last lens, the recessed part of the lens is so back down that the light comes in an angle where the sensor actually will have some chromatic aberration on the sides. So it's supposed not to work, but the M8 has a non-full-sized sensor. So you actually don't really have those color distortions on the side, and it's a great combination for a really, under-evaluated lens. So these are two good examples of it was Zurich. Pandemic was going pretty strong, and I wanted to document the emptiness of those urban spaces. The next two photos, those are also with a different kind of historical lens. The lens is a Telyt, Leica Telyt 560mm f6.8. And I've adapted it on a modern Leica SL2. Which makes for a pretty great combination because the SL2 has a modern sensor with a really good dynamic range, and it's pretty sensitive to light, so you can actually go up in speeds and compensate for the relative lack of aperture of those lenses. The Telyt is really an interesting beast. It's a really huge lens. The lens construction makes it look more like a tube. But the rendering is really, I think, it was a lens that was made for a pretty long time for the R system, Leica R system, reflex system. And it really has the characteristics of Leica lenses, but really has some good definition and keeps some kind of softness, and the color rendering I really like, and that's the Jura Mountains from far away. So it's an interesting combination. I would recommend you, if you don't do it, obviously you probably do it already, but adapt old lenses on modern bodies makes for interesting experiments in photography. Here we're going to film, and I was talking about the Leica M5 film camera. I really like rangefinders. I think the process of taking photos experience is different than with reflexes or with other kind of cameras. This was with the M5 film camera from Leica. I don't exactly know what kind of lens, probably a 50mm f2.0, and using Kodak TMax100 film. I'm an experimental photographer, so I will try to go to the limits of the equipment. Here we have one photo from a bar in Geneva, which was quite famous, quite an alternative bar, really nice place that closed because of the pandemic. I wanted to give this sort of feel. Film was great for it. And on the right side, you have it's a studio session. I did some more standard digital photography with really lights, work on lights, but I always include some film at one point where I go a little bit more in the experimental field. So that's the result of it. I wanted to have this sort of etheric looks. It's a half nude, and I found it interesting to find the experiments of film, and still with the film, still same camera. Actually, I do load a few cameras with diverse films, and I tend to use them whenever and not finish them. Just you do a few shots and store it, and then take it back again out. Here, I'm not sure about what lens I use. Probably a 180 millimeter f2.8 lens. Not sure. Maybe 135 millimeter. And yeah, I think film brings, even if you have simulations today and lots of things you can do in post-processing, but the film experience makes for something different. You don't take the pictures the same way, and the results are definitely not the same. If you start understanding your films, it makes for, it depends on what you want to do, but I really like this going from digital to film and vice versa. And here's the two examples we see are actually with lots of Leica in this series. It's with a Leica S2 medium format CCD version of this camera. Leica has a reflex camera system, which is named S system. And this was the S2 version. You find them actually pretty cheap, secondhand, and you can adapt lots of lenses. I got one of those S2 bodies. It's a 30-something megapixel CCD medium format sensor, and you find them pretty cheap. And you can adapt. Lenses from medium format lenses. I have a lot of Pentax 6-7 lenses, and here you have two pictures taken with the adapter. And using the 45mm f4 lens from the Pentax 6-7 format on that Leica S2. So you do get both the CCD rendering from an old CCD, it's an old camera, and the characteristics of the optics of those Pentax 6-7. Even so, the medium format from the 6-7 is way larger. I might make a video about it. I've done a few articles online about the differences between those medium formats in practice. Here were the two photos before in Geneva. Here are those two photos going to California. Again, rangefinder, Leica M240 body, which is slightly more modern. It's 24 megapixel, relatively sensitive sensor on this camera. Modern, a great battery life because it's pretty huge. The Leica quality. And here I have a 35mm f2 lens on it, I guess, an old version. And yeah, just gives you an idea of, I like the details. I like the colors of those lenses. This lens being an old version of the 35mm f2, you can see the flaring, and it's not as precise as something more modern, but you definitely have some character in this combination. Again, going back to those photos we're taking with the Pentax 6-7 lenses, I often take 1, 2, 3 lenses and one body and go around when I travel. In this case, it's with the Leica S2 medium format camera again. Gives you a good idea of what this combination can do. I really like the rendering of those CCD sensors. I know they're they used to be quite trendy, and people saying, oh, the CCD has a really different rendering compared to CMOS modern sensors, but Yeah, in practice, it's a slight difference, but I do feel something more organic with those CCDs. There's a downside. It's basically those old sensors are really not that sensitive to low lights. And when you go in, the noise has really different characteristics. You will get lines. It's because of the physical properties of those sensors. You're not going to get the same noise patterns on those sensors, so beware. But if you use them correctly or accordingly, I really enjoy using CCD sensors. Going back to film, here I find it a good example of what can be done using a really similar system. On the left side, you have a Leica M6 film camera using a Silbersalz film. It's a German company. It's actually a Kodak Vision 3 film, 35mm film. I'm not sure exactly which one I use on which roll I really used here, but it's actually it's movie film. So Silbersalz is a company in Germany. There's other companies that do the same. You will have the Film Photography Project in the States. You have, all over you'll find, if you search for it, you'll find people who put this cinema film into 35mm cartridges for you to be able to use them. In that case, those films have a background layer which is quite rigid, and it's an anti-halation layer which really gives a different rendering for the strong contrasty zones of your picture. So here's an example on the left picture. The right picture is using a CMOS sensor. The CMOS sensor of the same camera as the Leica M240, more traditionally named Leica M. Simply, it was a transition in the naming protocols at Leica. The first photo, the left photo, is with a Sumicron 35mm f2. The right photo, it's a Summilux 50mm f1.4. Really different rendering. Thought the place is the same. It's the same spot, not the same light. The right picture using such an open lens, a light-happy lens, I'll call it, and this modern sensor, I was actually able to. The photo is slightly blurry because of my move, but still, I was able, using the digital sensor and that lens, to catch this photo, which is basically beginning of night. I wouldn't have been able to do it with film, and I had to take a few. So that's just to say that very different approach when you do digital photographs or use film. Those photos, again, using the medium format digital cameras, Leica S2. I find it interesting the equipment you use, at least when I use such a big, it's a big camera and the lenses are heavy, it's not something really discreet, but you're really stable. Even so it's digital photography, you will concentrate on subjects differently. This being an old CCD sensor, it's not the dynamic range is not that huge. So basically you're stuck with film sensitivity values, and actually even less in some ways. I'm probably at 100 ISO equivalents with those pictures, and beyond 800 ISO on this camera, it's terrible. Even so, you can't really go much more higher. But with good control, which we were able to do with less sensitive film, that's what you get. This is in Pescadero and on the northwest of California, south of San Francisco. Again, south of San Francisco, Silicon Valley, that's Menlo Park, for those who know. Using the same Leica M240 camera, using a Summilux 50mm f1.4. I like the glare of those. It's an old lens. This is an old version of that lens. I like the glare that comes out of it. I like that rendering, which is very organic. It's an equipment I like to use traveling around. The rangefinder, manual focus, film-like experience. Same thing here with the photos in San Francisco. Again, we're fully in the pandemic, end of the year, last year. Yeah, the emptiness of urban space is a little bit like on the first photos from Zurich, but in San Francisco. So again, Leica M240 with probably also the Summilux 1.4 lens, 50 millimeter. And yeah, same here. I think it's exactly the same equipment. Not sure about my lens. It seems a little bit shallow for the f1.4, but I don't see what I could have used else. So, well, basically we're at the the gardens across opposite the SF MoMA museum. So yeah. Here, going back to medium format, that's a picture taken with the Leica S2 and the Pentax 6.7 lenses. I had 3 lenses on that trip, a 45 millimeter, but I'm not sure about the 2 other ones. I'm not a very good documenting photographer. I don't really note what equipment I've used specifically. I'm trying to correct myself, but it makes it hard for me to. I would guess it's a 45 millimeter f4.0 lens, but here again, medium format. I do like medium format, digital medium format, so that it's not very much larger than the full frame format, but gives you it opens up your point of view. You could sort of do the same thing with full frame and another kind of lens, obviously, but it's a question of you positioning yourself towards the subject and what kind of lens you use. Those medium format lenses are the qualities tend to be pretty good. You'll find them on full frame lenses, but they're usually more modern, so you won't get that old look from those old medium format lenses. So here I was documenting the town of Atherton, all those old houses that disappear to let place for those modern mansions. Here again, Pentax 6.7 lenses using the S2 medium format camera. San Francisco Bay from Fremont, the Fremont side of the Bay Area, marshlands. Also, for those of you who like heavy equipment, I use really many kind of cameras and equipment. I kind of prefer small cameras, but once in a while, I don't do the same photos using larger cameras. I don't concentrate the same way, and you're more stable with those huge cameras too. So yeah, same thing. S2 with the Pentax 6.7 lenses. That's Point Reyes, north of San Francisco. In that period of time, no tourists around. So you basically have all those spaces to yourself. If you go hiking during the week. Okay, finally going back to film, full frame, basically 35 millimeter. That's talking about using old equipment. I like using all kinds of cameras, and that's a Leica M3 camera with rangefinder again, using an old formula film from I think it's from Prague, the Fomapan 100 film. Very old looks, old rendering style, but very precise, quite resistant to underexposure and overexposure. And this is probably a 50 millimeter f2.0 Sumicron, an old version of that lens construction from Leica. So yeah, 2 examples of what kind of images you can take with using old equipment. Same thing on the left photograph, M3 rangefinder, probably the 50 millimeter f2.0, the same as before, Fomapan 100 film. Interestingly enough, on the 3 right pictures are taken with a way more modern camera, which was the Hasselblad XPan camera, which has this really panoramic format. I like to work in portrait mode, even with panoramic cameras. So 3 examples. And interestingly enough, here I have a way more modern camera using a modern lens made for that XPan camera. It's basically, the format is basically medium format on the longest side and 35mm on the others. So and here it's Retropan 320 film, which is an old emulsion from that Foma company from Czechia. Yay, San Francisco. We're back to medium format S2 Pentax. I think that's a good example of the rendering of those old Pentax lenses. And the CCD on this medium format camera, even though they're really cheap today secondhand, you have to imagine that at the time they were sold, they were really as expensive as a cheap car. So you really had a very high level of quality in the rendering. So those cameras don't really age. So that's what you would get using those old formulas of lens and the CCD sensor, which was supposed to be the top of the line at the time. I find it real interesting. Doesn't lose that organic feel that sometimes you lose with really modern sensors. Again, same equipment I'm from Sausalito here. It's the view of San Francisco afar. Interesting. One photo using actually the Pentax 6.7 camera was one of those lenses I was using, was the Leica S2. Using, I believe, TMax100 film. I like the small cloud we can see in the middle part of the composition. But you definitely, to me, those cameras are the real medium format. It's basically 4 times the surface of the medium format sensor. And you can really exploit those nice lenses that give you this classic Pentax look in this one. On the right, going to some completely different equipment. Not so completely, actually, because the first pictures you saw of the Montagne Jura were with the same combination. Leica SL2 modern digital camera using the Telyt 560mm f6.8 old school lens. And you definitely get precision in those old lenses. And again, secondhand, or if you can borrow those lenses. They're cheap both ways. So don't hesitate to go to older equipment. If it had been well treated, you'll get something out of it. And I definitely enjoy using those old, really tough, mechanically well-built lenses. Same equipment here, and that old rendering, the bokeh on this lens is really interesting for a tele lens. The Telyt system, I could talk about it for a long time. The Telyt system it's a weird idea from Leica, but it works pretty well, and there's many variations. So maybe in another video. Going back to Hasselblad here, the XPan camera, using color film, and we talked about the Silbersalz Vision 3 film from Germany. Cinestill is a company that actually removes this back layer I was talking about that's from the Cine film. Because actually this back layer, when you develop with C41 process, it might clog your system, it might destroy your chemistry. So it still is C41. Those films are Vision 3 films, are still C41. But Cinestill gets rid of that back layer before you expose it. So you can actually use C41 development directly with when you use Cinestill film. So here it's again Pescadero, this small town on the border of the ocean, on the California coast, south of San Francisco. you had the same house on the medium format from the S2 before. The Cinestill 50 ISO film, that's a really different rendering. I actually prefer way more this analog feel to the digital one, but it's different. Yeah, not the same story. Going to some really weird emulsions. The film photography project in the US has some really interesting films. And here, using again the XPan, the San Francisco Bay, same place as the photos I took before with the S2. That's an FFP film photography project, ISO 1.6 film that they actually put into 35mm canister. It's a Kodak film originally. I have a separate video. It's in French for now, but talking about that, I'll translate it hopefully soon. It's a Kodak film that was used for post-production in cinema. And basically the color balance was optimized for laser printing, LED printing, CRT printing. So the color rendering is really super strange. On those two pictures, you see this red band, vertical band. That's actually the small window on the back of the Hasselblad XPan that I didn't realize that being under the sun. That's a full brightness sun in August in San Francisco. My camera was held on a strap in front of me, and the sun was really hitting hard. And actually, there's a reflection inside the back compartment of the camera. So I've taped it in the meantime. But yeah, those windows do actually have an effect on your film if you don't beware. Yeah, and that's basically it for the month of August. I hope it was enjoyable, and if you have questions, comments, whatever, just write them down below the video, and see you next time.